I'm Clara, 32 years old, and as I drove my dusty sedan down the familiar oak-lined streets of Havenwood, a knot tightened in my stomach. This small southern town, with its charming antebellum homes and slow, syrupy drawl, was where I'd spent every summer, every Christmas, every moment of my childhood since I was a baby. It was home, yet it never quite felt like my home. The annual Havenwood Community Reunion was today, a tradition as old as the town itself, held on the sprawling green of the old courthouse square. It was a day for families to gather, for legacies to be celebrated, and for the town's deep-rooted history to be reaffirmed. For some, it was a joyous homecoming. For me, it was a test of resilience. My adoptive parents, bless their hearts, were pillars of this community. The Millers, kind, hardworking, and respected, had given me everything a child could ever want: love, stability, and a sense of belonging. But even their unwavering acceptance couldn't fully shield me from the whispers, the curious glances, and the subtle, unspoken questions about my origins. "She's a Miller, but not really a Miller," I'd overheard as a child, a phrase that echoed in my mind even now. In Havenwood, bloodlines were everything. Your family tree was your identity, your social currency, and your pass into the inner circle. Being adopted, especially when my biological parents were unknown and from outside, made me an anomaly. As I parked near the town square, the air buzzed with laughter and the aroma of barbecue. Children chased each other, their faces smeared with ice cream, while adults embraced, catching up on years of news. It was a picture of idyllic southern life, but I knew the undercurrents that flowed beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, adjusting the simple floral dress I'd chosen. I wasn't here to impress anyone, but I also wasn't here to hide. This reunion was a chance to face the past, to stand tall in the place that had shaped me, for better or worse. My parents, bless their hearts, were already there, waving excitedly. Walking towards them, I felt eyes on me, some curious, some openly scrutinizing. It wasn't my imagination. A few older women, their faces etched with years of gossip and judgment, exchanged knowing glances. I could almost hear their silent commentary. "There's Clara, still the outsider, despite all these years." A group of men, all sporting the same family crests on their polo shirts, chuckled as I passed. One of them, a distant cousin of the Millers named Jed, nudged his friend and muttered something I couldn't quite catch, but the smirk on his face was unmistakable. It was the same old story, the same old dismissiveness. My adoptive mother, Sarah, enveloped me in a warm hug, her eyes shining. "Clara, darling, you made it. We were just talking about you." Her genuine affection was a balm, a reminder of the true love that had always been my anchor in this town. But even as I returned her hug, I felt the familiar chill of unspoken judgment. This wasn't just a family reunion, it was a societal performance, and I was perpetually cast in the role of the other. The laughter I heard wasn't always joyful. Sometimes it was a barrier. I smiled, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "It's good to be back, Mom. Smells like a real Havenwood reunion." The scent of smoked pork and sweet tea filled the air, a comforting aroma that contrasted sharply with the unease in my heart. As the afternoon wore on, I navigated conversations, offering polite smiles and brief updates on my life in the city. Most interactions were pleasant enough, superficial exchanges that skirted around the deeper issues. But the underlying current of us versus them was always present. Then I saw him, old Mr. Abernathy, a man whose family had been in Havenwood for generations, known for his sharp tongue and even sharper opinions. He was holding court near the gazebo, surrounded by a small crowd, and his gaze landed on me like a hawk on its prey. He cleared his throat loudly, his voice carrying across the square. Well, if it isn't little Clara Miller. Or should I say, Clara who? A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through his audience, and my heart sank. This was it, the moment I always dreaded. Mr. Abernathy's words hung in the humid Havenwood air, a mocking echo that seemed to amplify the unspoken sentiments of many. My adoptive parents, who had been chatting nearby, stiffened. I could feel their protective instincts flare, but I knew this was a battle I had to face on my own terms. I forced a smile, walking deliberately towards the gazebo. Retreating would only confirm their preconceived notions. "Good afternoon, Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "It's Clara Miller. Just Clara Miller." His eyes, sharp and critical, swept over me, lingering on my simple attire. "Still haven't found your place, have you, girl?" he drawled, loud enough for others to hear. "Always chasing something out there, when your roots ain't even here." His words were a direct jab at my adoption, a reminder that in his eyes, I lacked true belonging. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, but most remained silent, their expressions a mix of curiosity and passive agreement. This was the Havenwood way, a quiet acceptance of the established order, a reluctance to challenge the powerful voices that dictated social norms. My adoptive father, Robert, stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Now, Jedediah, that's enough. Clara is our daughter, and she's as much a part of this town as anyone." His voice, usually calm and measured, held a rare edge of anger. Mr. Abernathy merely chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Of course, Robert. Salt of the earth, you and Sarah. But blood is blood, ain't it? And history is history. Some things just can't be changed, no matter how much you wish they could." His words were a thinly veiled reference to my race, a subtle but undeniable jab at my darker skin tone in a town predominantly white. It wasn't outright racism, not in the way one might see in headlines, but a pervasive, systemic bias woven into the fabric of Havenwood's traditions. I felt a surge of anger, hot and familiar, but I swallowed it down. Reacting with emotion was exactly what they expected. It would confirm their stereotype of the emotional outsider. I had learned long ago that true strength lay in composure. "My roots run deeper than blood, Mr. Abernathy," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "They run in the love and care I received, in the lessons I learned, and in the values instilled in me by the best parents a person could ask for." My voice was calm, but firm. His smirk faltered slightly, surprised by my directness. He hadn't expected me to stand my ground. Most people in Havenwood, especially those who weren't old money, tended to defer to him. "Well said, Clara." A quiet voice spoke from the crowd. It was Mrs. Gable, a retired schoolteacher who had always shown me kindness. Her small act of support was a lifeline, a reminder that not everyone in Havenwood shared Mr. Abernathy's narrow views. But the moment passed quickly. Mr. Abernathy, regaining his composure, waved a dismissive hand. "Humph, sentimental nonsense. This reunion is about heritage, about lineage, not about, well, you know." He trailed off, leaving the unspoken implications hanging in the air. The conversation around the gazebo quickly shifted, the crowd eager to move on from the uncomfortable exchange. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Every reunion was like this, a constant battle to prove my worth, to justify my existence in a place that inherently questioned it. My mother squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Don't let him get to you, sweetie. He's just an old fool." But even she knew that his words, however foolish, carried weight in this community. I nodded, trying to reassure her. "I'm fine, Mom. Really." But inside, the familiar ache of exclusion throbbed. It was a reminder of why I had left Havenwood, why I had built a life far away from its judgmental whispers. As the afternoon progressed, the thought of leaving early, of escaping the stifling atmosphere, became increasingly appealing. What was I hoping to achieve by staying? To prove something to people who refused to see me? Just as I was about to suggest to my parents that we head home, the mayor, Mr. Henderson, stepped onto a small makeshift stage near the gazebo, tapping a microphone. "Attention, everyone. It's time for our annual Voices of Havenwood segment." My heart leaped into my throat. The Voices of Havenwood was a tradition where community members shared stories, memories, or reflections on what Havenwood meant to them. It was usually reserved for the town's most prominent families. "And this year," Mayor Henderson boomed, "we have a special guest who has graciously agreed to share a few words. Someone who represents the spirit of our town, even if they've been away for a while. Please welcome Clara Miller." My breath caught. This was unexpected. This was my chance. A hush fell over the crowd as Mayor Henderson announced my name. I saw Mr. Abernathy's jaw drop, his eyes wide with disbelief. A few murmurs rippled through the reunion-goers. Clearly, this was not part of their expected program. My parents looked at me, a mixture of pride and apprehension on their faces. I hadn't prepared a speech. My plan for the day was to blend in, offer polite greetings, and then make a graceful exit. Now, I was standing on the precipice of a moment that could either solidify my outsider status or perhaps finally change it. Taking a deep breath, I walked towards the stage, every step feeling heavy with the weight of expectation and past slights. The microphone felt cold in my hand, and for a fleeting moment, I considered declining, making an excuse, and retreating into the anonymity I craved. But then I remembered the laughter, the dismissive glances, the constant need to justify my existence. This wasn't just about me, it was about every person who had ever felt like an outsider, every story that had been overlooked or dismissed because it didn't fit a narrow definition of belonging. I looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some vaguely recognizable from childhood. I saw the faces of those who had shown me kindness, and those who had silently judged. This was my stage, and for once, I wouldn't let anyone else write my script. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began, my voice a little shaky at first, but gaining strength with each word. "It's an honor to be asked to speak today. Havenwood has always been a place of deep roots, strong traditions, and for many, a sense of unchanging identity." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the faces, noting how some of the initial surprise was giving way to curiosity. Even Mr. Abernathy was listening, his arms crossed, a skeptical frown on his face. "I've spent 32 years walking these streets," I continued, breathing this air and being raised by the most loving parents a child could wish for, Robert and Sarah Miller. I glanced at them, and they offered me small, encouraging smiles. "But as many of you know," I said, my voice softening slightly, "my story in Havenwood didn't begin in the usual way. I wasn't born here, and I wasn't born into one of the town's founding families. I was adopted." The word hung in the air, a truth that everyone knew but rarely spoke aloud. A few whispers broke out in the crowd, and I saw some heads turn towards Mr. Abernathy as if confirming his earlier sentiments. It was clear that for some, my adoption was still a mark of difference, a reason to classify me as other. "And because of that," I continued, my voice firming, "I've often felt like an asterisk in the story of Havenwood. A footnote, someone who didn't quite fit the narrative of what a true Havenwood resident should be." I saw a few people nod, perhaps in recognition of their own unspoken thoughts, or perhaps in empathy. It was a gamble, laying bare my vulnerability, but I knew it was necessary to connect with them on a deeper level. "I've heard the whispers, felt the glances, and understood the unspoken questions," I admitted, my gaze lingering on some of the older, more traditional faces. Questions about where I came from, about my real family, about whether I truly belonged. The silence in the crowd grew heavier, more attentive. No one was laughing now. The casual dismissiveness had evaporated, replaced by a palpable tension. I had their attention. "But what I've learned," I said, my voice rising slightly, "is that belonging isn't just about blood. It's about shared experiences, about mutual respect, and about the willingness to see beyond what's on the surface." This was my opening, the pivot point. "Today I want to share a story," I announced. "A story not just about me, but about what family and heritage truly mean. A story that might surprise some of you, and perhaps change how we see each other." The stage was set. The air crackled with anticipation. I could feel every eye on me, every ear straining to catch my next words. This was no longer just a reunion speech. It was a moment of truth, a chance to redefine my narrative in Havenwood. "My adoptive parents, Robert and Sarah, are the embodiment of love," I began, my voice filled with genuine affection. "They gave me a home, a name, and a future. They taught me the values of hard work, kindness, and community, values that are truly Havenwood's best." I paused, letting that sink in. It was important to acknowledge the good, to show that my critique wasn't a blanket condemnation, but a plea for deeper understanding. My parents beamed, their eyes glistening with emotion. "But for years," I continued, "I carried a quiet curiosity about my birth family. Not because I loved my adoptive family any less, but because a part of me needed to understand the missing pieces of my own puzzle. Who was I before Havenwood?" I saw some faces in the crowd soften, perhaps recognizing the universal human need to understand one's origins. Even Mr. Abernathy's frown seemed to ease slightly, replaced by a look of grudging interest. "Recently," I revealed, my voice dropping slightly, "I embarked on a journey to find answers. It wasn't easy. There were dead ends, false hopes, and moments of profound frustration. But I persevered, driven by a need for truth." The crowd leaned in, captivated. This was a personal story, something far more compelling than the usual reunion pleasantries. The silence was absolute, broken only by the chirping of cicadas. "And what I discovered," I said, my voice gaining a quiet power, "was not what I expected. It was a revelation that turned my understanding of my own history, and perhaps Havenwood's history, completely upside down." I took a deliberate breath, letting the suspense build. This was the moment, the surprise I had hinted at. I looked directly at Mr. Abernathy, whose expression had now shifted from skepticism to outright confusion. "My biological mother," I announced, "was a young woman named Eliza May Johnson. She was born and raised right here in Havenwood." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Eliza May Johnson was a common name, but the implication was clear. "And my biological father," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the faces of the oldest families, "was a man named Thomas Sterling." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Thomas Sterling. The Sterling family was one of the founding families of Havenwood, a name synonymous with wealth, power, and deep-seated tradition. A collective gasp erupted from the audience. Whispers broke out, louder this time, a chaotic murmur of disbelief and shock. Faces paled, eyes widened, and I saw several people turn to look at the Sterlings, who were seated near the front, their expressions frozen in horror. Mr. Abernathy's face, which had been confused moments before, was now a mask of utter bewilderment, tinged with a dawning horror. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Thomas Sterling," I repeated, my voice clear and unwavering, "was the son of a late Senator Sterling. The very same Senator Sterling whose portrait hangs in the town hall and whose family has been celebrated in this reunion for generations." The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The laughter and dismissiveness from earlier were gone, replaced by a stunned silence. The outsider was suddenly revealed to be intrinsically linked to the very core of Havenwood's insiders. Eliza May Johnson, I explained, was a housekeeper for the Sterling family in the late 1980s. A young, bright woman from the wrong side of the tracks, as some might say. And Thomas Sterling was the privileged son, home from college. The implications were clear, unspoken but understood by everyone in the room. A scandal, a secret, a forbidden connection that had been meticulously buried for decades. My existence was proof of it. When Eliza May became pregnant, I continued, the Sterling family ensured it remained a secret. Eliza May was sent away to a distant city where I was born and then placed for adoption. My voice was calm, devoid of anger, simply stating the facts. The Millers, unaware of any of this, adopted me through an agency, I concluded. And so, I, Clara Miller, the adopted outsider, am also Clara Sterling, a direct descendant of one of Havenwood's most revered founding families. The tide had truly begun to turn. The revelation of my true parentage sent shockwaves through the Havenwood reunion. The stunned silence was slowly replaced by a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and outright exclamations. All eyes were now on the Sterling family, who sat rigid, their faces a mixture of mortification and disbelief. I watched as Mrs. Sterling, Thomas's mother, clutched her husband's arm, her face ashen. Their carefully constructed facade of respectability, built over generations, was crumbling before their eyes, exposed by the very outsider they had likely dismissed. "This is impossible," someone muttered from the crowd, a voice laced with denial. But the conviction in my voice and the palpable discomfort of the Sterlings told a different story. The truth, however inconvenient, had a way of asserting itself. I let the revelation hang in the air, allowing them to process the weight of it. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about dismantling the very prejudice that had defined my experience in Havenwood. "I didn't come here today to cause a scandal," I stated, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "I came here, as I always do, to honor my adoptive parents and to connect with the community that raised me. But the truth, once known, cannot be ignored. I looked directly at Mr. Abernathy, who now seemed utterly deflated, his earlier smugness replaced by a look of bewildered shock. His Clara who? Comment now held a bitter irony. He had questioned my lineage, only to find it was more deeply rooted than his own. My story, I continued, is not just about a hidden lineage. It's about the unspoken rules that govern our lives, the judgments we make based on appearances, and the uncomfortable truths we bury to maintain a certain image. The atmosphere in the square had completely shifted. The festive air was gone, replaced by a somber, reflective mood. People who had been laughing and chatting moments before were now exchanging serious, thoughtful glances. Eliza May Johnson was a wonderful woman, I said, my voice tinged with a quiet sadness. She was denied a voice, denied recognition, and denied the chance to raise her child simply because of her circumstances and the societal expectations of this town. I could see tears in the eyes of some of the older women, perhaps remembering similar injustices, or feeling a pang of guilt for their own complicity in Havenwood's rigid social structure. Her story and mine is a testament to the fact that heritage is not always what it seems, I explained. It's not just about the names on a family tree, but about the lives lived, the sacrifices made, and the secrets kept. I then spoke about the pain of feeling like an outsider, of being judged for something I couldn't control. For years, I felt the sting of being different, of not being enough for Havenwood. But what I now realize is that my difference is my strength, and my story is a part of Havenwood's story, whether it's been acknowledged or not. The silence that followed was profound, a respectful quiet that spoke volumes. The laughter had indeed turned, not into anger, but into a deep, unsettling introspection. So, when we talk about Havenwood's heritage, I concluded, let's remember that it's not just the grand houses and the celebrated names. It's also the hidden histories, the untold stories, and the quiet resilience of people like Eliza May Johnson. I stepped back from the microphone, my heart pounding, but a profound sense of peace settling over me. I had said my piece. The truth was out, and the future of Havenwood, at least in that moment, felt irrevocably changed. As I stepped down from the stage, the silence lingered, heavy with unspoken thoughts. No one applauded immediately. Instead, a collective exhale seemed to ripple through the crowd. It was as if they were all holding their breath, processing the seismic shift that had just occurred. Then, slowly, my adoptive mother, Sarah, walked towards me, her eyes brimming with tears. She didn't say a word, but pulled me into a fierce hug, a silent acknowledgement of the bravery it took to speak my truth. My father, Robert, joined us, his hand resting proudly on my back. The reunion, which had been a lively celebration moments before, now felt like a solemn assembly. People were gathered in small groups, whispering intently, their gazes darting between me and the Sterling family, who were now hastily gathering their belongings, clearly preparing to make a discreet exit. Mr. Abernathy, still looking shell-shocked, slowly approached me. His usual bluster was gone, replaced by a hesitant, almost apologetic demeanor. "Clara," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I had no idea. My apologies. Truly, it was a small gesture, but significant. The man who had dismissed me with a sneer was now offering an apology, a crack in the rigid wall of his prejudice. I simply nodded, acknowledging his words without needing to offer immediate forgiveness. Other townspeople, some of whom had been part of the silent observers earlier, now approached me with genuine expressions of sympathy and respect. "Clara, that was incredibly brave," one woman said, her voice choked with emotion. "We always knew you were special." The shift was palpable. The laughter had stopped, but so had the judgment. In its place was a newfound curiosity, a desire to understand, and perhaps a touch of shame for their previous assumptions. The Sterling family, however, did not linger. They practically fled the square, their faces a picture of humiliation. Their carefully crafted image of impeccable lineage had been shattered, and the weight of their secret was now public knowledge. Over the next hour, as the reunion slowly dispersed, I found myself engaging in conversations I never thought possible. People asked about Eliza May, about her life, about what I knew of her. They wanted to understand the woman whose story had been erased from Havenwood's history. I shared what little I knew, pieced together from adoption records and the vague memories of social workers. Eliza May was a talented seamstress, a quiet and kind soul whose only crime was falling in love with a man from a different social standing. The experience was cathartic. For years, I had carried the burden of my otherness, but now the truth had set me free, and in doing so, it had also challenged the very foundations of Havenwood's social hierarchy. My adoptive parents were my biggest cheerleaders. "You did good, honey," my dad kept repeating, his eyes shining with pride. "You showed them what true strength looks like." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the square, the atmosphere, though still subdued, felt different. There was a sense of introspection, a quiet reckoning with the town's past and its present. I realized that my speech wasn't just about my story. It was about opening a dialogue, about forcing Havenwood to confront its own biases and the unacknowledged narratives that shaped its identity. The laughter that had greeted me upon my arrival had been replaced by a respectful silence, and then by genuine conversation. The tide had truly turned, not just for me, but for the collective consciousness of Havenwood. I knew that one speech wouldn't erase decades of ingrained prejudice, but it was a beginning. A powerful, undeniable beginning. And as I looked at the faces around me, I saw not just judgment, but a glimmer of understanding, a seed of change. In the days following the reunion, Havenwood felt different. A subtle shift in the air, a quiet undercurrent of reflection replaced the usual hum of routine. My phone rang constantly, with calls from old acquaintances, some offering apologies, others simply expressing their shock and newfound understanding. Even the local newspaper, usually focused on bake sales and high school football, ran a front-page story titled, "A Reunion Revelation. Clara Miller's Story Challenges Havenwood's Past." It was a respectful, if slightly sensationalized, account of my speech and the hidden Sterling secret. The Sterlings, predictably, remained silent. They didn't issue a statement, nor did they acknowledge my claims publicly, but their absence from social events and their increasingly reclusive behavior spoke volumes. Their carefully guarded legacy was now irrevocably tainted. Mr. Abernathy, to my surprise, became a regular visitor to my parents' home, often bringing me a slice of his wife's famous pecan pie. He never explicitly apologized again, but his conversations were less about lineage and more about the changing times, about how things ain't always what they seem. His transformation, however small, was a testament to the power of truth. It showed that even the most entrenched beliefs could be challenged, given enough light and courage. It wasn't about converting everyone, but about planting seeds of doubt in the fertile ground of their assumptions. I also received letters, many from older women in Havenwood, sharing their own stories of hidden struggles, of feeling unseen or unheard in a town that valued conformity. My vulnerability had opened a floodgate, creating a space for others to share their quiet burdens. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a distant cousin of Eliza May Johnson, a woman named Martha who lived in a neighboring county. She had heard about my speech and wanted to connect. She had known Eliza May, had even suspected the truth of her disappearance, but had been too afraid to speak out. Meeting Martha was like finding another piece of the puzzle. She shared stories of Eliza May's vibrant spirit, her dreams, and the quiet dignity with which she carried her burden. It gave me a deeper connection to my biological mother, a sense of her humanity beyond the scandal. The town council, spurred by the public discussion, even initiated a new Havenwood history project, inviting residents to share their family stories, including those that had been overlooked or marginalized. It was a small step, but a significant one towards a more inclusive narrative. I knew that Havenwood wouldn't change overnight. Prejudice, deeply ingrained, takes generations to truly dismantle. But the conversation had started. The comfortable silence had been broken, and the once unquestionable traditions were now being questioned. My adoptive parents, who had always been my unwavering support, seemed to walk taller, too. They had always been proud of me, but now there was an added layer of admiration, a recognition of the profound impact I had made on their beloved, yet flawed community. I found myself looking at Havenwood with new eyes. It wasn't just the place where I had felt like an outsider. It was also the place where I had found my voice, where I had stood up for truth, and where I had, perhaps, initiated a quiet revolution. The laughter that had once defined my experience at the reunion was now a distant echo. It had been replaced by a different kind of sound, the murmur of genuine conversation, the rustle of turning pages in history books, and the quiet hum of a community beginning to heal and grow. I realized that my journey was far from over. This was just the beginning of a larger conversation, a continuous effort to challenge assumptions and build bridges. But for the first time, I felt truly at home in Havenwood, not just as Clara Miller, but as Clara, a woman who had dared to speak her truth. 1 year later, I returned to Havenwood for the next annual community reunion. This time, the drive felt different. The knot in my stomach was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. The oak-lined streets seemed to welcome me, not just as a visitor, but as an integral part of their story. The atmosphere at the reunion was noticeably changed. While the familiar laughter and barbecue smells still filled the air, there was a new openness, a subtle shift in the way people interacted. The Voices of Havenwood segment, now a highly anticipated part of the day, was no longer just about the founding families. This year, the mayor had invited a diverse group of speakers, a young entrepreneur who had started a successful business, a recent immigrant who shared her journey to Havenwood, and an elderly woman who spoke about the town's forgotten African-American history. The inclusion was a direct result of the conversation I had sparked. As I walked through the square, I was greeted with genuine warmth. People didn't just offer polite nods, they stopped to chat, to share updates, and to express their continued appreciation for my courage. The whispers were gone, replaced by respectful dialogue. Mr. Abernathy, now looking a little less gruff, waved me over to his table. "Clara, my dear, come sit. Martha Gable was just telling me about that wonderful scholarship fund you started." He even offered me a genuine smile, a far cry from his sneer of a year ago. The scholarship fund, named in honor of Eliza May Johnson, provided financial assistance to young women from disadvantaged backgrounds in Havenwood who wished to pursue higher education or vocational training. It was my way of ensuring Eliza May's legacy was one of empowerment, not just scandal. The Sterlings were conspicuously absent from the reunion, their usual prominent spot empty. Their family home, a grand estate on the edge of town, had recently been put up for sale. It seemed they had chosen to retreat from Havenwood's changed landscape. My adoptive parents, Robert and Sarah, were beaming. "You've truly transformed this town, Clara," my mother whispered, her eyes shining with pride. "You've shown them what real family means." As the Voices of Havenwood segment began, I listened with a sense of profound satisfaction. The stories shared were richer, more diverse, and more authentic than ever before. Havenwood was slowly, but surely, beginning to embrace its full, complex history. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't recount the past year's drama. Instead, I spoke about the future, about the importance of empathy, of listening to stories different from our own, and of building a community where everyone, regardless of their origin, felt a true sense of belonging. "A year ago," I began, my voice strong and clear, "I stood on the stage, sharing a truth that shook some of us. Today, I stand here to celebrate a different truth, the truth that Havenwood is capable of growth, of learning, and of embracing a more inclusive future." I spoke about the Eliza May Johnson Scholarship, about the young women it was already helping, and about the ripple effect of kindness and opportunity. It was a message of hope, of moving forward, and of building a legacy based on compassion, not just bloodlines. As I concluded, the applause was thunderous, a genuine outpouring of appreciation and respect. It was a stark contrast to the nervous silence and subtle mockery of the previous year. The laughter had truly turned into a chorus of acceptance and admiration. Walking away from the stage, I felt a deep sense of peace. Havenwood was no longer a place of judgment and exclusion for me. It was a place where my story had found its rightful place, where my voice had made a difference, and where I finally, truly belonged. My journey had started with laughter and dismissal, but it had ended with a triumph of truth and a new definition of family. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a better future, one where every story mattered and every voice was heard.